Now let's begin our comprehensive study of Confucius's timeless Analects, one of the most foundational and influential texts of Chinese philosophy. This remarkable work, the Analects of Confucius, is neither Buddhism nor Buddhist teaching. Instead, it represents the profound wisdom of Confucian learning, which stands as one of the three great philosophical traditions alongside Buddhism and Taoism in Chinese culture. So why exactly are we studying this particular classical text today? Actually, our dedicated work on the Analects of Confucius came to an abrupt halt nearly 6 years ago, specifically on October 19, 2019. And from then until now, there has been almost a full 6 years without any meaningful progress on this important study. At that time, we could effectively teach through various online platforms and digital media. Back then, I clearly remember the circumstances. I just carefully looked at my detailed diary entry from that particular memorable day. The attendance was quite substantial and impressive indeed. There were 27,393 people who diligently attended the class that day. Later, however, unfortunately, the study society was completely dissolved. Many impermanent changes occurred unexpectedly. After that significant event, I kept wanting earnestly to resume the teachings in 2020 and 2021, always thinking about continuing. But then suddenly the pandemic happened. And last year, even more significant and challenging events occurred throughout the region. So now, in our current difficult situation, there are fewer than 100 people present here today. And even gathering 100 dedicated people has proven quite challenging and difficult. Then there are also the lamas present here. One person said they couldn't understand properly and withdrew just the day before yesterday. Whether it was because they couldn't understand or were afraid of the examination process, I'm not sure. Of course, we're not lacking just 1 or 2 people, but whenever anyone undertakes anything, it's always better to see things through carefully from beginning to end. If others have similar concerned thoughts, that is their complete freedom. But this approach might not be particularly beneficial for your entire life journey or many other important aspects of personal development. So even if others truly lack the inner courage for examinations and such challenging situations, we can assess the situation when the appropriate time comes. During the examination that day, we also discovered that some people indeed might have considerable difficulties with various aspects of the exam. This was also clearly the case for the nuns. As for the nuns' particular situation, the total number of people we had originally confirmed that day actually decreased significantly as well. There were the English class participants. It seemed there were relatively few people in the English class at that time, and if many of them weren't actively listening and participating, it would also be somewhat difficult and problematic. So in the past few days, after repeated and extensive discussions with the Women's Academic Affairs Office, they reluctantly agreed to our proposal. But since they've agreed to this arrangement, I sincerely hope your English classes should not be interrupted or disrupted. Sometimes there might be minor scheduling conflicts, and that's perfectly acceptable. For example, if my classes directly conflict with the English classes, you can certainly have someone else record them for later review. Or if the English classes present some scheduling conflict, you can record those as well. That should work perfectly fine. Back when we were studying in middle school, we had many different and varied courses to manage. And each one had comprehensive examinations, both major and minor subjects that required serious preparation. For example, Chinese language and Tibetan was only taught once per week. Then there were Tibetan mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, as well as music, physical education, politics, and dialectical materialism, approximately a dozen different courses in total. And for each individual course, there were comprehensive exams at midterm and final periods. Many of us here have also been through similar educational experiences, so if there are slight scheduling conflicts, I sincerely hope our Institute's English group, as well as other various classes, since the academic office worked hard to make these adjustments. After these careful adjustments, studying together shouldn't present any major problems or difficulties. So in this important regard, I sincerely and earnestly hope that when you begin studying, don't be overly enthusiastic at first, only to become far too relaxed at the end. That's certainly not beneficial. We are all students of the scriptures and treatises. If those who study the scriptures cannot even maintain this level of consistency, then that person's diligence and overall spiritual cultivation may have serious issues. So I genuinely think, starting from today, we will also have one dedicated class per week on Confucius's Analects. Regarding this Analects class, some of you may not have attended the earlier sessions. I have already taught 6 classes previously. We thoroughly covered the learning chapter and significant parts of the governance chapter. We have discussed substantial portions of the governance chapter in detail, completed the learning chapter. But there are also comprehensive written materials available. Audio recordings are also readily available if you want to catch up on earlier content. As for me personally, I don't have any oral transmission. There is no Confucian lineage in China either. We are simply learning together as a community. I haven't received instruction from any teacher either. I'm just forcing myself to study it diligently and carefully, consulting various classical commentaries. Now it seems there are also 2 different Tibetan translations available, one by someone from Golok and another distinguished one. Both versions have already been published and are readily available online. So the Tibetan versions can also serve as valuable cross-references. Of course, when we study the Analects carefully, there probably isn't anything like the particularly profound Dharma principles discussed extensively in Buddhism. There really aren't any such teachings. Most of it concerns this very lifetime. Things like how to conduct oneself properly, how to interact with others, how to handle various affairs, including how to serve your family and friends respectfully, how to be filial, fundamental principles in these areas. Although these may appear quite simple, in reality the profound thoughts and culture of the ancients are remarkably fascinating. So regardless of our particular ethnicity, studying this is certainly much better than spending all day watching short videos on TikTok, Kuaishou and such platforms just to pass time. Comparatively speaking, there are still some profound worldly truths contained within these teachings, and when we study these carefully, on one hand, it's a valuable form of traditional Chinese cultural knowledge, and learning it this way is also very important. When I taught this before, it seemed Chinese people particularly resonated with it. Perhaps it's because the culture is deeply embedded in their ancestral heritage. But for people of other ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, some of the fundamental principles and ideas may not align quite as perfectly. But regardless of that, I think if everyone wants to study it thoroughly and carefully, there should be some meaningful benefit gained from it. As for myself, personally speaking, I genuinely think Confucius was truly remarkable. Although there are indeed certain aspects of our traditional culture here in Tibet worth mentioning as well, including certain hexagrams, ancient divination practices, and traditional ritual ceremonies specifically designed for dispelling various obstacles. Confucius is actually considered an emanation of Manjushri Bodhisattva. Confucius is also known as Gongse Choki Galpo in Tibetan. There are such beliefs among them. Of course, there is some ongoing debate about this in academic circles. Regardless, there is some controversy. But regardless of that, whether Confucius is truly an emanation of Manjushri, we cannot say with complete certainty. I've mentioned this before in the ancient text Record of Dharma Treasures Through the Ages. It is indeed clearly recorded that the Buddha Shakyamuni officially acknowledged 3 emanated bodhisattvas in the East. One was Laozi, another was Confucius, and the third was Yanzi, Confucius's disciple, whom we often encounter in the teachings. Regarding this particular topic, I've discussed it before. This is not without any basis. Indeed, in some ancient historical records, it has already been mentioned. So regarding this matter, I don't really want to elaborate this time because given our current delicate situation, it might be better to discuss religious principles less and focus more on worldly principles, which is more appropriate for our current era. In that case, we should carefully and thoroughly study Confucian philosophical thought and teachings. In fact, many aspects of it are quite reasonable, valuable, and worthy of deep consideration. I think Confucius's learning spirit is truly admirable and inspirational, because at that time in history, Confucius lived during very challenging circumstances. There were some previous golden eras that came before his time, including the legendary times of the sage rulers Yao, Shun, and Yu. Confucius lived during the tumultuous spring and autumn and warring states periods, when ancient China was divided into approximately 7 competing brother states that were constantly fighting. They were constantly engaged in warfare with each other. It was truly a time of great chaos, political turmoil, representing a very unique and historically turbulent era. But even in such difficult and challenging times, he never gave up his commitment to learning. The most inspiring aspect of Confucius's spirit is that even in such a chaotic era, he never abandoned his dedication to learning and self-improvement. No matter where he traveled among the various states, he maintained this spirit of continuous learning and growth. I think this dedication is very important because when it comes to learning, many people, unfortunately, give up at a certain point in their lives. For example, some might attain certain prestigious positions, like becoming a Khenpo or Khenmo, then advancing to become teachers, and at that comfortable point, they completely forget their original commitment to lifelong learning. Or they claim they don't have sufficient time, or simply don't want to continue studying anymore. Some gain significant wealth and become rich, enjoying many material pleasures, and then they completely abandon their pursuit of learning and knowledge. Some people, for instance, might become ill, or the entire era might undergo changes, like what happens during special historical periods. For example, during the turbulent 1960s and 70s, there were many significant and dramatic changes throughout all the Tibetan regions. Even then, there were individual great masters who did not give up their commitment to learning and teaching. Even in Chinese communities, some dedicated scholars went to various places and never abandoned their studies, despite facing numerous hardships. So in Confucius's historical era, first, his era was quite special and challenging, and his family circumstances were also rather unique and difficult because his elderly father passed away when Confucius was only 3 years old, and then his mother was forced to raise him alone in that difficult situation. In ancient times, such single-parent families often faced significant social discrimination and hardship. It was exactly the same in our Tibetan regions. When a mother raised a child alone, people around them would also look down on them with prejudice. As we say, I don't know about your specific area, but different places have different terms for this situation, like single mother or similar expressions in Tibetan language. Confucius was in exactly such a challenging situation, so in that case, there was absolutely nothing in terms of his family's official governmental position or great wealth or anything advantageous like that. You might already know from previous studies that when Confucius's father was around 70 years old, he married Confucius's mother, who was only 18 at the time. There was a remarkable 54-year age difference between them. So his parents' relationship was quite unusual by any standards. When he was just 3 years old, his father, who was already quite elderly and frail, passed away peacefully. He grew up from early childhood under these particularly challenging and disadvantaged family circumstances. In this difficult situation, actually, for most ordinary people in similar circumstances, first, the era was politically chaotic, and second, his family did not have the financial resources or social connections for proper education. Under these difficult circumstances, to keep studying independently on his own was extraordinary. He must have possessed special innate wisdom or developed an exceptional acquired learning ability through dedication. Some people later asked Confucius's devoted disciples where exactly he had learned all this extensive knowledge and profound wisdom that he possessed. Because at that time in history, it seemed there weren't really any formal teachers available for Confucius, except possibly for the sage Laozi. But some of Confucius's disciples replied that actually Confucius, apart from learning from the great Laozi, according to detailed historical accounts written by the historian Sima Qian, it seems he did study under Laozi, especially regarding the principles of benevolence, righteousness, and ritual propriety. Some of these fundamental principles he had already sought from Laozi. Other than that significant influence, Sima Qian stated there was approximately a 30-year age gap between them. Apart from this important connection, Confucius was entirely self-taught through personal effort. Whenever he encountered someone new, he would immediately take that person as a learning model and learn a great deal from their experiences and wisdom. Then when he went to a new place, whether he observed mountains and rivers or flowers and plants or local customs, he could learn valuable lessons from many different aspects, unlike us who travel around extensively but learn nothing meaningful and return home empty-handed with no new insights. So Confucius's innate wisdom and learning capacity was somewhat different from others. He also didn't have any formal teachers to guide him. Unlike many of us who depend on teachers for 10 or 20 years of formal education, he didn't have that luxury, given his unique circumstances. And also, Confucius lived in different states, sometimes seeking political refuge, sometimes facing all sorts of situations. This is worthy of our deep reflection, because our lives are full of various challenges and obstacles. Some people encounter a little difficulty or illness, or some kind of suffering, and at such times, perhaps even the basic ability or desire to learn is completely lost and abandoned. This is not good at all. We should deeply reflect on this important matter. Also, actually, Confucius and Shakyamuni Buddha, including the so-called king of Western philosophy, Socrates, these three remarkable figures were historically three truly exceptional great figures who emerged during similar time periods. Shakyamuni Buddha lived from 563 BC to 483 BC, according to most scholarly calculations. Of course, regarding Shakyamuni Buddha's precise chronological calculations, there are different methodological approaches in different regions. In terms of calculating the Buddhist calendar, there is the Phurba tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. There are also calculation methods of Theravada Buddhism in the southern tradition and those of northern Buddhism. But according to the teachings of northern Buddhism, he was born in 563 BC, according to scholarly consensus. As for the great sage Confucius, he was born in 551 BC, according to historical records. There should be approximately a 12-year age difference between these two remarkable figures. Shakyamuni Buddha was about 12 years older than Confucius. They were basically contemporaries from the same general era. In this historical context, Confucius lived to about, some historical sources say 74 years old, others say 72 years. So he probably died around 479 BC, according to most scholarly calculations. Compared to these Eastern sages, the Greek philosopher Socrates was somewhat different. He lived from 470 BC to 399 BC, according to documented historical records. So basically, they were all within the same historical century, in one remarkable century BC. These three great philosophical figures actually represented the intellectual traditions of China, India, and the Western world, respectively. So what are the fundamental differences among these three great thinkers? As for Confucius, the only major documented work remaining is the famous Analects. There are others, including the Great Learning, Doctrine of the Mean, Classic of Filial Piety, and Standards for Being a Good Student and Child. In some books of traditional Chinese culture, there are also some additional sayings attributed to Confucius. But the real authentic work he left behind is actually the Analects as we have it today. And because the Analects was compiled in different historical eras, there are many different versions. As for Socrates, there are actually no books in the world that were truly written directly by him personally. He himself firmly believed that wisdom should be passed down orally through direct transmission, and this oral tradition would enhance memory and understanding. He thought wisdom should not be reduced to mere written words. If put into writing, it would become rigid and lose much of its deeper meaning. However, his devoted disciples later, such as Plato and others, did record some of Socrates' philosophical thoughts in writing for posterity, but even these careful records are not very complete or comprehensive. The only exception is Shakyamuni Buddha, which everyone should already know about. Our current Buddhist canon has 108 volumes in the Tibetan tradition, but actually there are far more texts than that number. This is also mentioned in related historical accounts. And like Confucius's Analects, it's just scattered phrases and sayings, just a few brief sentences here and there without systematic development. But the Buddhist sutras are not like that at all. Each one is extremely complete and comprehensive, whether exoteric or esoteric teachings. No matter which sutra or tantra text, they have all been recorded very completely and systematically. Of course, Shakyamuni Buddha did not write everything down personally at that time. It was all later recorded by accomplished arhats and great bodhisattvas who possessed the special unforgetting dharani memory retention, compiled in different historical eras through oral transmission. So if some of us make comparative studies, we don't need to say Buddhism is great, or Confucianism is great, or Western philosophy is great. We don't need to make such sectarian comments. But if we let future historians examine and analyze the historical records of these philosophical thoughts from over 2,500 years ago, which were preserved in writing and which were not, then regarding those teachings preserved in comprehensive written form, such as our Buddha's teachings, whether about the profound concept of emptiness, or about luminosity and clarity of mind, or about conventional worldly truths, what has been preserved is all-encompassing and comprehensive. These philosophical ideas are incredibly rich, profound, and sophisticated. Otherwise, some of us, after studying Confucianism for a while, it seems, develop great confidence in Confucian teachings and then unfortunately lose faith in Buddhism. In the past, when we discussed the standards for being a good student and child or similar traditional texts, there was a male lay practitioner, somewhat bearded in appearance, usually quite intellectually wise, a university graduate, relatively older in age. I remember he was about 50 years old. As he studied the standards text, he developed tremendous confidence in it, saying it was remarkable, truly extraordinary. He would often stop me on the road talking endlessly about it. I thought he was learning quite well initially, but later it seemed he developed wrong views about Buddhism, developed exclusive faith in Confucianism, then withdrew completely. When he left me a farewell letter, saying he would focus on Confucianism from then on. Look how extraordinary the standards are. And then he stopped studying Buddhism entirely. People's spiritual capacities are different. So later I was quite puzzled by this, feeling that the standards at most discussed some basic principles that were indeed well explained, but deeper and broader philosophical principles were not mentioned at all in that text. But sometimes it's really quite hard for us to comment appropriately. We'll let things take their natural course as they will unfold. So I sincerely hope that even if I explain the Analects really well and comprehensively to everyone, if in the end all the lamas and nuns end up studying Confucianism exclusively and abandoning other Buddhist studies, as long as they don't abandon their fundamental Buddhist refuge, that's acceptable. But if this particular situation probably won't happen in reality, but among people there will always be some exceptional cases and unusual individuals. Anyway, starting today, let's study a bit of the Analects each week thoroughly. As for the Analects, we will all study it together as a group. So let's look at the previous Weijing or governance chapter that we studied before. Actually, the Weijing chapter, in modern terms, should be understood as political administration. It's mainly about political affairs and governance principles. The first chapter discussed learning extensively and covered many important principles about learning and education. Sometimes those discussions are quite interesting and insightful. And this second chapter is mainly about politics. Of course, politics today refers to the special systematic methods rulers use to govern people and manage society. But politics at that ancient time didn't necessarily always involve collective management, like comprehensive national management or extensive tribal management systems. It wasn't always like that in ancient times. Politics at that time ranged from matters as large as the entire state to as small as individual families. All of these various levels were considered important aspects of political thought and governance philosophy. That's mainly what's discussed here in this chapter. And within this broader context, today we are studying the second chapter of the Analects. Last time in our previous comprehensive exam, we covered the famous passage, "At 15, I set my heart on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no doubts. At 50, I knew the will of heaven. These are important concepts you have all been tested on, so this should be familiar to you." After we've covered this material then, how many pages are we covering today? 5.
위에是吧? 와야 돼. 내 말감인구나 역스티나. 가스다 강식나야 되라 그때 체색이 잘나래.
Everyone should still look at the earlier material we studied. During the exam that day, some people gave various kinds of different answers. When we were grading the exam papers, there were many amusing and interesting stories that emerged from the responses. I think in the earlier part of the Analects, Confucius was talking about his own personal life experience. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no doubts. This progression seems very reasonable and logical. You should look at it again for better understanding. We won't discuss this material today. Today we'll start with Meng Yizi asked about filial piety. Confucius said, "Do not go against." Let's go through this passage one by one systematically. The following is the content we'll cover in today's lesson. Each and every one of his many different disciples thoughtfully asked him a profound and insightful question. What is filial piety? What does it mean to be filial? Every disciple asked this question, but Confucius, in his wisdom, gave a different answer to each person. Indeed, each answer was quite different. And in giving different answers, he showed skillful means and adaptability. He addressed all sorts of different aspects.
So the greatest characteristic of Confucius is that when he answered these three people, he responded according to each person's wisdom and character, their cultivation and their personal interests and their various pursuits, and from different perspectives, he was able to resolve their questions accordingly. He would teach according to the situation. That's how he was. This is also very important for us today. Otherwise, some people may actually be very eloquent, but they don't understand the context. They talk endlessly about everything, appropriate or not. This isn't very good either. Some people only care about what they understand and have no idea whether it's suitable for the occasion or not, especially those who are a bit arrogant and have good speaking skills. Wasn't it the case before in front of Socrates came an eloquent student also? He spoke endlessly and eloquently in front of him, and everything he said was incredibly well organized and very impressive indeed. And he thought to himself, in front of such a great teacher as Socrates, talking like this, I'm certainly extraordinary, he boasted. Later, Socrates replied, very well, then you must pay double the fee for your lessons, starting today. One is the tuition fee for teaching, and you have to pay the tuition fee again. Why is that the case? Because I absolutely need to shut your mouth, and that particular action requires a fee. So sometimes we may be quite wise, but we just can't grasp the main point at all. Logically speaking, when it comes to this, for example, if a teacher explains something to you beforehand, and then asks you to tutor others when you go to tutor and about what this teacher explained. Logically, if you listen to a lesson in front of a teacher, and if you can remember what the teacher said, it's best to include that as well. Of course, not everything may be entirely reasonable, but at the very least, you should still include it. But in this regard, there's no attention paid at all. Maybe when it comes to listening to the lesson, they're not attentive, and then they just start talking nonsense on their own, saying a lot of things which is quite unreasonable. This is something Socrates was very much against. When he spoke, he made sure to speak thoroughly and to speak to the truth he wanted to convey. That is what true wisdom truly is. So here, when Confucius speaks, he is indeed responding to the very questions of four people situated below him. All of them are asking the very same question, specifically about filial piety. What exactly is filial piety? All of it is based on the four different questions from four different people. But when he answers, he gives four different answers. And when the later generations look at this, it's very interesting. Confucius was truly wise. So when we do speak, Mipham Rinpoche, in his advice to the king, has a section called On Speech. In the Kai Gen Tan, there are also many ways of speaking. This is important. Whether teaching scriptures or guiding sentient beings, say what's needed, not what's not. Even among things that should be said, you have to carefully discern which topics are truly appropriate to discuss and which are not. If you were to talk about police matters in front of a medical doctor, or perhaps speak about profound transcendental topics in front of a police officer, then it simply would not resonate at all. So this aspect is very important. Then here there is indeed someone called Meng Yizi. Meng Yizi truly seems to be another distinct person, a different individual altogether. And he was also a disciple of Confucius. But according to some historical accounts, Meng Yizi and Confucius, because Confucius later served in the state of Lu as the equivalent of today's Minister of Justice. In charge of judicial affairs later, Meng Yizi was there and he had received teachings from Confucius. But later, the person in charge of the judicial department began to target Confucius when Confucius was serving as the Minister of Justice. Did I make a slip of the tongue and say wrong? At that time, Meng Yizi didn't cooperate with him very well at all. Later, Confucius had no choice but to leave. So their relationship wasn't very good afterwards. As for Meng Yizi's personality, he was rather forceful and quite assertive. And he was indeed the son of Meng Shizi, a fact that was well known. Speaking of Meng Shizi, in the past, at an international occasion, he didn't do very well in terms of etiquette and suffered a loss because of it. After that setback, he entrusted Meng Yizi to Confucius to learn more about proper etiquette. Otherwise, you see, he felt a bit embarrassed about what had happened. At that time, Confucius was probably around 30 years old when he started teaching them about proper etiquette. He was widely considered something of an esteemed expert and would diligently lecture all those eager disciples who were learning the intricate rules of etiquette. So at that particular time, Meng Yizi respectfully asked Confucius, "What is filial piety?" That was his question. Then Confucius said, here, whenever it says zi yue, it always refers to Confucius. Confucius said, do not go against. He told him not to go against. Not go against what exactly? not to go against the established rules and the systems of etiquette and ritual. In other words, do not break the existing rules, because this particular person often broke some of the rules and this caused issues. Confucius didn't say much more to him. He only gave him this one sentence. His answer to him was simply, do not go against his wishes. Don't go against, don't break the rules. Do not go against the established knowledge and the accepted rules of etiquette. That was the only answer given. And this particular person was rather arrogant, so he did not continue to ask any further questions. There was another individual named Fan Chi. Fan Chi was driving, and Confucius told him, Meng Sun asked me about the important concept of filial piety, and I concisely replied, do not go against. Fan Chi, who was Confucius's personal driver, was also present, similar to what we would call a chauffeur today. At that time, there weren't real cars. He was the one who drove the horse-drawn carriage, Confucius's driver. He was also relatively young. It's said that he was 46 years younger than Confucius. Many of Confucius's disciples were younger than him. At that time, when Confucius was older, many people looked up to him. Many young individuals, indeed, were trained and educated by the renowned Confucius. Confucius was said to have had 3,000 disciples in total. Among them, 72 were the most important. These 72 were his most capable disciples. That's how it's recorded in history. So Fan Chi, with a sense of dedication, started driving the carriage. They proceeded together. Generally speaking, he trusted his driver quite considerably. It's truly the same with most people, even in the present day and age. When some corrupt officials are arrested, their drivers are also taken in. They often have quite close and personal relationships. So he would always choose people he truly trusted more. At that particular time, Fan Chi started driving for him. As they were just leaving, Confucius told him, today, Meng Yizi, a diligent student, asked me a question. What exactly did I tell him in response to his inquiry? Just do not go against. I didn't say anything else. Actually, Confucius wanted to say more. But since Meng Yizi didn't continue to ask, he kept this bit of personal dissatisfaction entirely to himself and subsequently shared it with his trusted driver while they were on the road. He explicitly said, Meng Sun indeed asked me about the important concept of filial piety. Meng Sun, in this context, specifically refers to the previously mentioned Meng Yizi. Meng Sun is the grandson of the previous Meng Yizi. Maybe that's why he's called Meng Sun. Anyway, it's the earlier Meng Yizi. Meng Yizi asked me what filial piety really is. I told him, do not go against. That's what I said to him. He just mentioned it in passing. He then recounted the entire process to the driver once again, detailing every step. Then the driver asked further. Fan Chi said, what do you mean by that? Confucius said, while they are alive, serve them with propriety. When they pass away, bury them with propriety and offer sacrifices with propriety. So this driver, just now, Fan Chi asked him, what do you mean by that? Do not go against. He was asking what filial piety is. And then you replied to him that it means not to go against. So what does that mean? The driver was a bit slow-witted. He might know how to drive, but he doesn't really understand etiquette. So he then asked, what does this mean? What does that mean? Right? That's what he was asking. And what does not going against mean? Or that's what he asked. When he asked, Confucius began to explain to him. He said that this not going against when they are alive, here alive refers to mainly one's parents and some elders. So when they are alive, you should serve them with proper etiquette. You should always attend to them carefully and respectfully, according to the established rules of proper etiquette. While they are still alive, there are certain rules that one should follow. For example, when it comes to parents, while they are alive, how should you provide for them? Show them respect and serve them. How do you wash their feet? How do you help them? How do you give them massages when they are sick? Most of these terms in Confucianism are about such things. If we're talking about other things, it might be about teaching them proper principles or offering prayers. So there are these things, but they don't have any of these. He said that while they are still alive, you should serve them diligently according to established rules and well-defined systems. And when they eventually die, when parents ultimately pass away, they should be buried with proper and respectful rites. That is to say, the burial process should meticulously follow the proper rules and established regulations. For example, should the deceased body be interred in the ground, or should it be a water burial, or perhaps a sky burial? All of these significant practices are carefully done according to ritual propriety and long-standing tradition. Actually, regarding Meng Yizi, we mentioned earlier, seems when his father passed away, he was basically like a high-ranking minister. But he himself was rather ostentatious. So he meticulously followed the established rites for a son of heaven. The son of heaven was originally called the king in ancient times. He handled his father's funeral according to the proper etiquette for a king. So, in other words, Confucius was essentially saying, when your parents are alive, you should be truly filial to them. And when they are gone, whatever social standing or status you yourself may possess, you must manage their funeral arrangements according to that particular status or position. Don't do this. If the person was originally in the position of a minister, but you insist on giving them a king's funeral, that goes a bit too far. A person ought to keep a sense of proportion, to know proper measure, and to act in keeping with his station and role. And this, indirectly, was the point he wished to impress upon him. To offer sacrifices according to ritual, even after death, for example, after 1 year or 3 years, you still perform them. For example, in Buddhism, when we hold a nirvana ceremony or memorial for a certain lama, this is called a ritual offering, right? We perform some commemorative rituals for them afterwards. And when conducting these rituals, they should also follow the rules of propriety. The ritual should be carried out according to the rules of propriety without exceeding them. So what is being conveyed here? Addressing Meng Yizi, he sets out a simple rule, yet even such a rule must be carried out with ritual courtesy, stated plainly, but within the bounds of decorum and respect. It should be entirely appropriate to one's social status. So, in the context of Buddhism, especially when it comes to our parents, we should serve them with proper principles and Buddhist teachings while they are still alive. And then after they pass away, we should continue to honor their memory and legacy. We should also show them proper respect and reverence. For example, in the Buddha's teachings, it is said, such as in the Vinaya Sutra, there are also examples. After the Buddha attained enlightenment, his father, King Shuddhodana, when he manifested parinirvana in Kapilavastu, Shakyamuni Buddha personally came. Because at that time in India, they would carefully carry the deceased body on their shoulders, reverently lifting the bier upon their shoulders to respectfully transport it. At that time, Shakyamuni Buddha personally participated, and although many people advised him not to carry it, in order to repay his father's kindness, after Shakyamuni Buddha attained enlightenment, he also personally carried the bier, the funeral stretcher, with the body of his beloved and revered father. After Shakyamuni Buddha was born, about 7 days later, the revered Lady Maya manifested her final parinirvana. Her sister, later known as the great Bhikshuni Mahaprajapati, began to raise him. During the process, he was also respectful to her. Later, after he heard that she had passed away, he asked Venerable Ananda to prepare many, many things, kinds of oil, flowers, and all sorts of things, like 500 of this, 500 of that, a great many things. After arriving there, he began to make offerings to her relics. At that time, many devas tried to persuade Shakyamuni Buddha, saying, "You don't need to personally make the offerings. Let us make the offerings for you." But the Buddha said, "Her kindness to me is like that of a mother. She has shown me great kindness, so I must personally come to make offerings to her relics." So as for the Buddha, including towards his own biological father, later, when Mahaprajapati Bhikshuni manifested parinirvana, he also personally attended to her funeral affairs. Therefore, for some of us Buddhists, or even some devoted monastics, we should serve our beloved parents well while they are still alive and with us, according to your own established customs and traditional rules. And when they are no longer physically present here with us, we should also actively participate in handling their important funeral matters and arrangements. In the past, some Dharma friends here have asked, if my father passes away, can I go back home? If my mother passes away, can I go back home? And we have never had any doubts about this. You absolutely must go back, because no matter what, whether you are ordained or a Buddhist practitioner, your parents have shown you such great kindness in your life. And when they eventually leave this world, it is absolutely wrong not to properly handle their funeral affairs. Some people may even desperately want to see them one last time. They might be gravely, perhaps even terminally ill. In such situations, we often advise everyone to go back to their hometown and visit parents. In this vast world, the kindness of parents toward us is the greatest. The Buddha also said that their kindness to us is the greatest. If even the Buddha personally handled his parents' funeral affairs, then for the rest of us, it goes without saying. So whether it is making offerings and providing support to your parents while they are still alive, or after they have unfortunately passed away, you must at the very least go and take care of the necessary funeral arrangements. Or if there are other important matters that come up later on, you should also attend to those with care and responsibility. Nowadays, for example, during the Qingming festival, people often burn paper offerings for the elderly, things like that, a meaningful and customary practice. But now I hear that to prevent potential and dangerous fires, you can't even burn paper offerings or incense anymore. A considerable amount has certainly changed, but I suppose that's perfectly fine. If the revered Confucius saw this current situation, he probably wouldn't be too pleased at all. You can't even properly burn paper. How did it ever come to this point? This is precisely what I was just talking about at this very moment in time. This is one example. Just now, one of his disciples actually asked, you can take a look as well. He was asked the same question by each disciple, but his answers were actually different. So for all of us here in the future, when we encounter different questions, we should first look at the person asking. Is this person being intentional, or are they being critical? Or are they sincerely asking, or do they genuinely not understand? Sometimes when someone asks a question, you can actually tell a great deal from their overall attitude and demeanor. So a person's background and experiences, all of these things, if you know them, that's best. Even if you genuinely don't know, you should still endeavor to make a choice. This is indeed very important. The second crucial question is this. Meng Wubo asked about filial piety. Confucius once wisely said, parents are only truly concerned about their children's illness. This is indeed the second significant point. Yes, if we carefully count from the very beginning, this is chapter 6. It's the 6th chapter in the previous section, Wei Cheng. In the 6th chapter, there is a notable figure, Meng Wubo, who appears. In fact, Meng Wubo is also the son of the same Meng Yizi we just referred to. In other words, the Meng Wubo under discussion here is precisely the child of that earlier mentioned gentleman, Meng Yizi. Meng Yizi's father was truly, in fact, called Meng Yizi. Meng Yizi's son was indeed called Meng Wubo. So in their family, the lineage continued and flourished. As Confucius said, both the father asked what filial piety is, and the son also asked in his turn what exactly filial piety is. They were, in today's contemporary terms, a prominent third-generation official family. They were second-generation wealthy, third-generation affluent, and third-generation government officials. However, Meng Wubo's personality was rather arrogant and quite conceited indeed, and he was quite self-indulgent. Because usually the children of very wealthy and incredibly powerful families, they often are not very well educated. He was rather arrogant, quite proud, and consistently didn't listen to any guidance or advice. He was also someone who possessed very little ability or competence. When this person asked, it was the same as before. He asked about filial piety, and then Confucius replied. The word yue here, as everyone clearly and precisely knows, in classical Chinese, yue simply means to say or to speak. Confucius once wisely said, filial piety is truly when the only thing your beloved parents worry about is your illness. So what exactly is filial piety? It profoundly means letting your dear parents' sole and primary concern be your health and well-being when you are unfortunately sick. That is what true filial piety is. They should only worry when you are sick. They shouldn't have to worry about anything else. In other words, apart from that, there should be nothing else for them to worry about. Because for parents, when their beloved child is sick, they are definitely worried and concerned. This is something that absolutely cannot be avoided. When I just had surgery, my mother, well, I deliberately kept it from her. Later, when they were chanting sacred scriptures, she eventually found out. So for anyone, if something unfortunate happens to their child, it is a truly devastating experience. They will inevitably be very worried. But if the son is filial, then parents don't have to worry about anything else. Even now, there are many cases like this. For example, if a child is obedient, parents can't help but worry when the child is sick. But aside from that, they'll think, wow, our child at home is really good. As long as they're not sick, as for everything else in his life, he absolutely doesn't drink, doesn't do illicit drugs, and certainly doesn't mess around with anything inappropriate. He doesn't steal or do any of those things. He won't get involved in any kind of illegal activities. There are many cases like this, including some monks. If a person becomes a monk and is a good one, the parents feel very reassured. As long as he isn't feeling sick, he should be absolutely perfectly fine and well. But if the child is disobedient, even getting sick is a minor issue. Some parents even say it's better if their son just died. If he's sick, maybe they won't say it, but if he died, it would be better. He's done so many things outside, and the family has lost everything, bankrupt. He's breaking the law daily, in and out of prison many times. So the parents are extremely, extremely troubled and feel very uneasy and quite uncomfortable. So what Confucius truly meant was, because this child Since he was indeed Meng Yizi's own child, he might have been disobedient. So when giving him an indirect answer, he said, I'm not sure about that right now. As long as you're not sick, your parents won't worry, and that's enough. So Confucius was actually quite a remarkably interesting historical figure. He told him in this way because this particular child at times truly does cause his parents a significant amount of worry and considerable concern. So that's why he answered him this way. This is actually a pretty low standard, isn't it? Being filial to your parents, providing for them regularly, these are things you simply can't manage to do. As such a disobedient child, if you just don't do anything trouble except get sick, even if you serve them every day, no matter how you are when they're alive or what you do when they die, it's not as good as you. His father was actually a little better. He was just arrogant. But this child might have been even worse. That is why Confucius said that when it comes to most parents, we often talk about the well-known and historically significant story of Mencius' mother moving 3 times. Mencius' mother, for the sake of her devoted child, moved house really 3 times. Once they lived next to a cemetery, another time next to a large slaughterhouse, and she deeply felt that these surrounding environments were not good for her young child's development. Later, she eventually moved to a place next to a school. That environment was very good and beneficial. Nowadays, many parents, those who are truly wise and discerning, when they buy a house, it's the same situation in mainland China. They choose to buy a house near a school. If it's near a school, and the child grows up next to a school from a young age, there are indeed some benefits. This is the educational influence of the story of Mencius' mother moving 3 times. If it weren't like this, the child might be influenced in all sorts of ways. But nowadays, in this internet age, parents are no longer like parents and children are no longer like children. Because the mindset of parents these days, there really isn't much education involved. Apart from being online every day, there's nothing else. If children grow up in this kind of environment from a young age, maybe after some period of time, it seems like things could potentially get pretty scary. We often see young children who are about 3 or 4 years old. Every one of them is playing with a phone. If they don't have a phone, they cry uncontrollably. Parents, just to keep the household quiet and peaceful, often hand their children an iPad or some kind of phone. In this particular way, the parents are inadvertently playing themselves, and so too are the children. Everyone just spends the whole day in a daze. In this situation, the future could indeed be quite frightening and potentially very concerning. And as we mentioned earlier, nowadays on the internet, you will find the content with the highest click rates. The most traffic, the most views, all of these are negative. They are about insecurity and similar topics. As for content that is truly about truth, goodness, and beauty, basically no one watches it, no one clicks on it, very few people do. So in our current modern era, perhaps it is truly enough for children to simply not cause their parents any undue worry or concern regarding their well-being. But even this worry comes in many different forms. Whether it's truly about your professional career path or other significant aspects of your personal life. In fact, parents are quite pitiful. From a very young age, they've always been sent their children to places with good schools. And according to their own circumstances, they pay much higher tuition fees if they can truly afford it. They eat very poorly and dress very poorly themselves, just so their children don't have to suffer as much hardship. All parents share this kind of mindset. But after children grow up, it doesn't really turn out that way. When it comes to their own children, they pay special attention to them. No matter how much it costs, their children can go to school. But when it comes to how much money they spend on their parents, to keep them healthy and well, or to properly take care of them, many people are not very willing. This is especially getting worse in big cities nowadays. In the Tibetan regions, in the past, when it came to filial piety, it was naturally very good. But now, under the pervasive influence of Western culture, whether it's some significant impact or a subtle influence, more and more elderly people, even those considered relatively filial, will just hire a professional nanny for their elderly parents. At most, when there's absolutely no other viable way, that's precisely what many people often do. Some time ago when I went to Luding, I visited an elderly man. At that time, Khenpo Sodargye called me and said, if you go over there, there's an elderly man, a former leader whom we know, and asked me to go visit him. He said back when we went to Wutai Mountain, he generously gave each of us 10 yuan. Do you remember that particular occasion? He said, I distinctly remember, so you should definitely go and see him. Now he's quite sick and unfortunately can't come up anymore. So I decided to go and visit him. Indeed, even though he has a very large and supportive family, some of them are also leaders. But in many ways, it's still not very convenient. So when I look at many of us, after people get old, even if they have already raised many children, because nowadays some individuals are quite pragmatic and they are often reluctant to give up their current jobs. And if you actually leave your current position, you might not even be able to keep your full salary. So for the sake of their own families, everyone stays at their own jobs. And as for their parents, or put them in nursing homes, or have someone else hire a nanny. It's like this. Relatively speaking, in Tibetan areas now, perhaps the family planning policy at the time wasn't enforced as strictly as it should have been. So now in Tibetan areas, in most families, parents typically have several children, often more than one. In this situation, things are relatively better. But in many truly big cities, when it comes to filial piety and caring for parents in their old age, more and more significant problems are continually emerging. Next, let us now talk about and discuss the second question for Confucius. The previous one was indeed Meng Wubo's question, a significant inquiry. The third one, in chapter 7, Ziyu asked about filial piety. Confucius said, nowadays filial piety means being able to provide for one's parents. But even dogs and horses are provided for. If there is no respect, what is the difference? This person is called Ziyu. Ziyu was also a disciple of Confucius. He was 45 years younger than Confucius, if I remember correctly, 45 years. He was the only disciple from the south, because most of Confucius's disciples were from the Shandong area, primarily in the northeast, specifically around that particular region. However, Ziyu, on the other hand, was from the south. He was also a literary scholar. He was quite learned and knowledgeable. He was gentle in temperament, but very principled and unwavering. According to some historical accounts, he later went to the Jiangnan area, a region of great beauty, to promote his ideas. He was truly considered a rather successful and influential scholar. So Ziyu asked about filial piety. You see, they're all asking about filial piety. They ask questions like, what exactly is filial piety? When Confucius answered, he said, filial piety means providing for one's parents. What we call filial piety today, when we speak of filial piety, most people mean simply this, that as long as you can provide for your parents, care for them, tend to them properly, keep them well, then you are being filial. Yet even dogs and horses can be kept and nourished in that way. This part, even dogs and horses can be provided for. There are two ways to interpret this. One way to explain it is, when it comes to dogs and horses, dogs meaning dogs, and horses, of course, everyone knows, even beloved dogs and noble horses are adequately provided for. If the discussion is solely about simply providing for them, offering your parents basic food, appropriate clothing, and secure shelter, that is certainly fine too. And when we take good care of horses and dogs, we also provide them with food and a comfortable place to live. It's the same thing. So if there's no spiritual aspect, no other forms of true filial respect toward them, if it's merely material support, then in fact there's truly no real difference between diligently caring for horses and diligently caring for dogs. That's precisely how he clearly explains it. Another group of insightful scholars firmly believes that if you only provide fundamental necessities such as food, secure shelter, and basic material support, then, for example, consider domesticated animals like dogs. They will also diligently guard their owner's home with unwavering loyalty. And horses are commonly used for riding and serving the family in various capacities. So in that sense, they both play a significant and supportive role in assisting you. So again, there's truly no real fundamental difference between them. If I only treat my parents well in a material sense, then these horses and dogs are also very good to the family. These two interpretations are somewhat opposite in meaning. Some scholars insist that the latter explanation is correct. Otherwise, if parents are cared for in the same way as we care for dogs and horses, it seems disrespectful to people. But if you look at it quite literally, it seems that the earlier explanation is indeed more appropriate. If you only provide material help to your parents, then there's really no difference between caring for dogs and horses. This is also just a difference in material support. But what is truly different when it comes to your parents?
It's about respect. If you truly don't have a deep reverence for them, then what truly distinguishes it? What is the fundamental difference between genuinely caring for horses and dogs? There's really no difference. The point is, when it comes to our parents, it's not just about truly providing material support. What's even more profoundly important is the emotional aspect, because after all, they are human beings. Since they are human, they need emotional communication. Emotional respect and emotional care for others essential. These are very important. Nurturing their hearts is very important. If you don't have this, then it's really no different from raising animals. Nowadays in big cities, we often see this quite a lot. For example, when it comes to parents, in some cities in Japan and China, all of the original villages, which were once thriving and vibrant communities, are now entirely populated by elderly people. Their children are often far away, living in distant cities or other places, maybe sending them a bit of money, maybe giving them a call once in a while. But beyond that, there's nothing else. If that's the case, it's just like raising cattle or horses. You assign someone to feed them some grass, and that's about it. But in reality, it's not like that. When you were little, your parents didn't just give you food and drink. They didn't just leave you there. It's not like that. From the time you were small until you grew up, they taught you bit by bit how to walk, how to eat. Then, when you got a little older, how to learn knowledge and skills, including for people like us. For example, my parents are both illiterate. They can't recognize a single letter, not even the basics. They may have never even seen those letters before. Sometimes I think about my parents. They probably have never seen Tibetan letters in their whole lives, let alone English or Chinese, Japanese or German. Those are even more out of the question. But no matter what, from a young age, they really taught me a lot about how to be a good person, maybe even more important. It seems that, in my memory now, my mother taught me even more knowledge. Looking back at my own life and the influence on me, it seems what my father taught me. Maybe all fathers are this. They give you a rough idea, maybe tell you, but there are many little things. My mother, wow, she taught me what it means to be a person, how one should behave, much knowledge in this world. My parents' academic knowledge couldn't help, but they would still recite some scriptures, chant some mantras, prostrate, offer lamps and such. So in these aspects, they did teach me a little. But as for real knowledge, they themselves were illiterate and didn't understand. So I think if back then your parents only cared about you, feeding you, giving you something to drink, and didn't care about anything else, maybe you wouldn't have starved to death, but what kind of person would you become? Everyone should be clear about this. So as children, we grow up. The way we support our parents doesn't necessarily have to be like raising cattle or horses, just giving them a bit of food and a bit of drink and thinking that's enough. So generally when people get old, it seems like parents only get a little bit of care. Right now, this is the case in many places in Han regions. As for the children, at most they send a package or something, just mail them a little something, and then call to say, I'm really busy, really busy. It shouldn't be like this. Some children are still very patient, as long as it's their parents, because parents tend to be a bit naggy. When people get old, they repeat things over and over endlessly, just like an old ox chewing grass. They go over many things again and again. They might forget what they said earlier and then say it again and again. But some truly filial and devoted children are genuinely very patient and understanding. They continue to listen, providing comfort to them. And then going a step further, they communicate with parents mentally and take care of them. Actually, as young children, sometimes we really need to do this for our parents. Even just having a meal with them and chatting with them is a wonderful experience. Maybe then, even after they pass away, we won't have regrets. This is also a very basic kind of difference. Otherwise, as we often say, a mother's heart is like flowing water, while a child's heart is like hard stone. A mother's heart is especially soft and tender, always worried and afraid for her children. Every day she's worried about you. But a young child's heart is truly like a stone, not really caring very much at all about her, almost as if it doesn't matter in the slightest. This is a kind of pattern. So generally, we see filial piety towards parents is still very important. Now we've studied Confucian thought. The main thing is to learn how to be a good person. As for other things, like the differences between the Madhyamaka Prasangika and Svatantrika schools, these kinds of very subtle distinctions, there's really nothing much to say about them. They're not present here either. So as for the Buddha, at that time it should have been in the alternative translation of the miscellaneous Agama Sutra, right?
At that time, someone then said to the Buddha that he indeed truly took care of his parents by providing for them materially and by supporting them and by helping them spiritually and emotionally with correct and sound principles. In this case, does it bring merit or not? Then the Buddha praised him greatly, saying that what you are doing, because on one hand you provide for them materially, and if you have faith, you also give them a kind of spiritual support by sharing correct principles with them in this significant way. At that time, the Buddha said, if you diligently do this, all the great Brahma gods and the powerful Indra will certainly come to your home, and all the powerful gods of fire, water, and so on and so forth, and many others will also come to your home, and all your merits will naturally gather together, and so on. In some related Theravada scriptures, there are also extensive and detailed discussions on this very important topic. So we should truly think that towards our own beloved parents, it's not just simply about providing materially and financially, ensuring their livelihood is secure, but more importantly, in terms of their profound spiritual well-being and overall inner peace, we should always strive to show genuine respect and openly communicate with them. This is a very important point. This aspect represents the third question in our discussion, correct? Moving on, the fourth question, which is also significant, originates from Zixia. It appears that within the initial chapter of the text, in the Shui chapter, this person also appears. Zixia asked about filial piety. Confucius said, the most difficult part is attitude. When there's work, younger ones labor. When there's food, elders are served. Is this what you consider filial piety? When there's food, elders are served. Is this what you consider filial piety? Zixia was also a scholar, quite similar to Ziyu, who was mentioned earlier. He was approximately 44 years younger than Confucius, or something along those lines. So he was relatively young. But in terms of theory, he spoke very well. But in practice, he wasn't as good at putting things into action. He was that kind of person, and what he said was, among us, some are good at talking, some at doing, some are good at both, able to do both. Some can only talk but can't do. Some can only do but can't talk. In many respects, the differences are quite significant. Some people, when they speak, wow, it's all flowery and impressive. You'd think this person must be really amazing. But when it comes to actually doing things, they're so-so, not that impressive. Some people don't say much. It's like when we sometimes give presentation, you really can't tell just by looking. Sometimes, since I've met a lot of people now, some speak well, but their actions may not align. Others don't speak well, but perhaps they are actually truly capable. There are all sorts of thoughts like that, and you simply do not indeed truly know. Anyway, there are all kinds of people, as you all know. At this point, Zixia asked about filial piety again. You see, the four questions we've encountered here today, all the questions asked are, what is filial respect? What is filial obedience? They're all essentially the same question. But where does Confucius's brilliance lie? If it were just us, maybe our answers would just go around in circles. I'd give him the same answer. For example, if the father asked the question, I'd say the same thing to the son. If the other two people asked, I'd answer them the same way. The knowledge in this answer, I've mastered myself, so it's relatively easy. Confucius wasn't like that. For each person, considering their status, their situation, their personality, their backgrounds, he gave different answers. Moreover, each answer represented a way of thinking. At this point, he mentions Senan. The hardest thing is to maintain a pleasant demeanor. This Senan is indeed very important. Just like the disrespect mentioned in chapter 7 earlier, this is very important. Even though the wording looks the same, two key characters are the focus. Senan means we should have a pleasant and gentle expression. The expression on your face, this is very difficult. If you truly want to be filial and show your respect, for example, you should often use your facial expressions towards your parents, your attitude, your pleasant demeanor, your smile. These are indeed things you absolutely must do. Otherwise, if your overall attitude seems truly bad, even if you were to give them some money or other material things, it doesn't really mean all that much at all. So when we talk about sena, it refers to your facial expression, and it's quite difficult to manage your expression. Why is that? When there is work to be done, the disciple should take on the labor. If something comes up, then the disciple or the younger person or the children should do things for their elders. Generally speaking, when parents have something that needs to be done, the children should do it. For example, if there is some work or chores, you should go and do it. This is something everyone probably knows. When there is wine and food, like wine or meat, if there is something good to eat or drink, the elders should be served first. By elders, we mean parents, seniors, and those of higher generation. They are the ones to enjoy the food. Enjoy here means to partake in it. They eat first, and that's acceptable. But is this really considered filial piety? Is this truly what it means to be filial? That's the idea being discussed. This aspect of expression is actually the hardest. When there's work to do, you go and do it well first. When there's food and drink, the elders are served first. If those who deserve respect are to eat and drink, is that really filial piety? No, it isn't. Why isn't it? Because your expression is very important. So what is mainly being discussed here in this particular context? For example, when we have something truly delicious, even now that's how it is in Shandong. I've been there many times. Generally speaking, it is customary for the elders to eat first, and that is also precisely the case with shared meals. And when there are things that need to be done, elders are usually not allowed to do them. The young people do them instead. Otherwise, it would be considered quite embarrassing indeed. Sometimes after the elders, the men eat first, then the women. There's a kind of social custom to it. There's also a bit of gender inequality. It existed in the past as well. Now it's a little better, not as serious. But just the fact that elders eat first, in these certain specific places, elders eat first, elders drink first. Elders don't do things, young people do them. Generally speaking, this is the case. It's actually a sign of filial piety, and that's acceptable. But what's even more important is your expression, your demeanor. If you don't look happy, if you rush to do things for them, like, here, you eat first, that's actually a really, truly, and genuinely bad attitude to have. Some of us really do treat our parents this way, acting truly respectfully in front of other people, only just for mere show. But deep down inside, we're actually really quite impatient, or just especially irritable. We don't really want our parents to be truly happy, but actually for our parents and our elders, it's a different story. They really care deeply about your overall attitude. On one hand, of course, they certainly feel a certain way about you. I once had an experience with a relative. This relative was also quite elderly, advanced in years, and he lived together with his son's family. From what I could observe and discern on the surface, it appeared to be a harmonious arrangement. It seemed like she did a pretty good job for him every day. One time, the old man and I were sitting together, and I asked, "The people in your family, they treat you very well, don't they? Is that right?" He said, "In terms of food, clothing, and everything, they treat me very well. But they often have a stern face. Their expression isn't very good." So I really do feel that way. And I always remember these words of Confucius. Whether it's some of the children or other immediate family members, if they show unpleasant or negative expressions toward him, then maybe because elderly people don't have power, they don't have much inherent strength. So other people's facial expressions and reactions might be very important and significant to them. They pay a great deal of attention to people's nuanced facial expressions. So nowadays we have a term for this. This is called emotional value. When one's attitude is genuinely warm and considerate, that in fact represents the highest kind of value. Indeed, it is the highest state or level one can reach in life. It's the same way. So now let's take a much closer look at how things truly are. When it comes to our beloved parents, we should genuinely feel it deeply and sincerely from the heart, because emotions and outward expressions are generally quite difficult to fake. Whether it's the genuine expressions children show to their loving parents, or the subtle nuances of human interaction, or the attitude young people have toward the elderly, it is usually not something that you can truly pretend. So whatever a person is thinking deep in their heart, it usually shows clearly on their face. At times like this, if the parents are unhappy, that's actually a pretty serious offense. Some people might even harbor deep resentment in their hearts and just do things on the surface, but that doesn't really mean anything. In the past, the Miscellaneous Parables Sutra also mentioned that it was probably Maudgalyayana, foremost in supernatural powers. Buddha told, "Your karmic retribution is about to manifest, be careful." Then Maudgalyayana started to boast a little because he was the one with the greatest supernatural powers. He said, "It's fine. If karmic retribution comes, if from the east, I'll hide in the west. If from the west, I'll hide in the east. If from the south, I'll go to the north. If it comes from the north, I'll go to the west. No problem at all." So he started to boast. After that, he became a bit more cautious. But in the end, he accidentally fell into a valley, down a cliff. And at the bottom of that cliff, it seemed an old man was there making a wheel for protection. It was something like a wheel. At that moment, when the old man saw him, it seemed like a manifestation of karma as well. When he saw this person, he found him especially strange. He thought this was a ghost, a demon. So he immediately grabbed his tool and struck Maudgalyayana fiercely. As a result, he broke his bones. At that moment, Maudgalyayana couldn't even remember that he had any supernatural powers at all, because his karma had manifested. It was only later that he realized that in a previous life, who exactly he was, I forget. Anyway, when he was a human being in a past life, he was quite disrespectful to his own parents, and once he harbored deep anger in his heart. He thought that if he ever had the chance, he should break their bones. He gave rise to such evil thoughts and made such a wicked vow. Because of this karmic retribution, in fact, Maudgalyayana also suffered the consequences of karma that year. Which scripture is this from? It should be from the Miscellaneous Parables Sutra, I think. It's mentioned there as well. So I think we should do our best. If in our hearts we can truly respect elders, seniors, and our parents, that's excellent. If we really can't manage it in our hearts, at least outwardly, we should always truly treat them well. Nowadays, many parents and children don't live together. And when they're not together, sometimes just simply calling them to communicate, I truly think that's now the only truly possible and effective way to connect with them. For many people, it's just sending a quick message or something like that, you know. We don't even know if our parents can read it clearly. And then they often look at some messages on WeChat. I've noticed that many elderly people these days, they just hold those kinds of phones, and naturally the volume is always turned up really loud. Actually, they're waiting every single day for calls from their children. Back when my mother was still around, when my father was alive, there weren't even any telephones yet. When my mother was still here later on, we got a phone. She would keep the phone on all the time, every day. I told her, you should turn off your phone, don't leave it on all the time. My son is out this time, he might call me. So she always kept it firmly on her mind. That's why if I were to call her and spoke to her in a slightly kinder tone, if I truly communicated with her from the heart, that would be a great virtue. For her, that's also a form of filial piety. So that's why Confucius said here, it's hard to maintain a pleasant demeanor. If we don't remember the Analects clearly, if you can remember just a few words like asanan, it's hard to maintain a pleasant demeanor and not respectful. Maybe in the future, when it comes to your own parents, to elders, to teachers, all of these are about showing respect. And it should indeed be of some very considerable help. All right then, that's absolutely all for today, for now.
Bandara Badna Sodargye Bandara Badna Sodargye Bandara Badna Sodargye